Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Good. Well, welcome everyone to data visualization with QGIS. This is probably my favorite topic with QGIS. And my goal with this course is to introduce you to this really large array of cartographic and data visualization features that you can find in QGIS now. I think this is probably the area where QGIS has seen the most growth in the last several years. And so the course will be mostly me demonstrating techniques, and then I will be giving you an assignment that you can try out all the techniques on your own. And then of course, a week from today, we'll have a question answer period where we can have a more informal discussion about issues you ran into or other questions that you have. So let me give a brief introduction. So the session is being recorded. So this is one resource that you will have. I will post this as a video on YouTube, as an unlisted YouTube video, and I'll give you the link so that you can rewatch the session. I work for Septima in Copenhagen. I'm a GIS consultant. So I do a mix of spatial analysis. I do a lot of work with wildlife and natural resources and public health. I've also now, since I've just moved to Denmark a year and 4 months ago. So I came from the US, and I am now working also on many Danish projects. I do a lot of cartography and also quite a bit of teaching. I'm a QGIS certified instructor and an OSGO or OSGO charter member. And I've written several books on QGIS, and these are the most recent two. This book, QGIS for Hydrological Applications. The second edition has just been completed and should be available in ebook form at least in a couple weeks, and in print form in a month. And this is recipes for catchment hydrology and water management. And I co-wrote this with a Dutch colleague, Hans van der Kwast. So this is a really nice book that not only shows you hydrological uses of QGIS, but along the way shows you a lot of the symbology and data visualization techniques that we're going to show in this course, learn in this course. And this has just been updated. So it's updated to QGIS 3.22. So that's just been finished. And on the right, Discover QGIS 3X. Also, I am revising in the second edition. It will be released in a couple months. I am 98% finished updating it, and it has quite a few new exercises in it. It's going to be updated to QGIS 326 probably. And it includes a lot more Danish examples at this point. So I think what I'd like to do now is just have everyone go around and just briefly introduce yourselves, since we'll be with each other for a couple weeks here. So Mads, do you want to start?
Yes, I just should turn on the mic. Yeah, my name is Mads Thomsen, and I'm working at a big utility company in Aarhus Vand. And I have been working with GIS for almost 20 years, starting with MapInfo, and now I'm a software developer. So we have also been working with Google Maps, and now we're working with OpenLayers as a JavaScript library, and we're using Oracle as a spatial database. And I'm using QGIS for a project in Ghana, where we are doing a registration of the sewer system in Ghana. And I need to make some beautiful maps, and that's why I'm participating in this course.
Oh, good. Interesting. You should know there's also a, well, we can get to that later when we get to that material. So let's go to the next. Lars?
Yes, my name is Lars Pilman. I also work at a utility company in Zealand, Roskilde and Lejre and Holbæk municipalities. I'm a planner and a project manager. So I realized 5 years ago or something that GIS programs had some huge advantages in presenting data, and I'm kind of building my skills on presenting or what I'm working with, to get the message out basically to as many people as possible, and looking to get tips and tricks, and yeah, just learning on how to present data first, mainly, I guess. So
Yes.
yeah.
Fantastic. Hans?
Yeah, here I am. My name is Ansgar Petersen. I'm with the University of Copenhagen. I have been in GIS and CAD since the late 70s. I've been most of the places, I think, MapInfo as well, AutoCAD, ArcGIS, of course, and QGIS lately as well. I'm particularly interested in the temporal dimension of data, including moving objects. My research is mainly in mobility and recreation. So I share a lot of your interest, Kurt. We do share projects as well. I'm mainly here to learn about QGIS and the advanced topics, mainly dealing with moving objects and things that change over time in other ways. So I'm really pleased to be with you.
Great.
And my hair is completely off this morning, I realize.
Anna-Marie?
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Anna-Marie Bürger. I'm a biologist. I'm a consultant. And my specialty is in the line between vegetation, botany, and GIS, and how to present data on maps for everyone to understand. I also work with what we call green infrastructure, which is not the same as we want to have elbiler on the road, right? This is how do we let nature migrate through lines. And this is all things where I use GIS, and I have used QGIS since 12. Yeah, and I'm sort of, there's a lot of people in my surroundings who asks me about what to do with QGIS and where can we do that. So, well, I know a bit, right? And I'd like to know more.
Don't.
Thanks, everyone. It sounds like we're all in the right class. So this is our schedule. We have today from 10 to 12. I'll be giving you an assignment. A week from today, we will meet to go over any questions, kind of an informal session on, symbology and data visualization in QGIS. The second class will be on 12th of May, same time, same Zoom link for all these sessions. And I have to update that. That is not the right date for the completion of the assignment. I sent that in the email, sorry. And then the last question and answer period on the 20th of May. So this is going to be kind of just briefly introducing you to all these different topics, because there's way too much in QGIS to do in 2 to 4 hours of demonstration time. But I'm hoping to just kind of give you enough information so that you can take this and do your own exploration and in your own data and maps and work with these techniques. So today we're going to talk about some print layout tricks to begin. We're then going to cover layer effects, which allow you to add things like drop shadows and other effects to vector layers. We'll look at elevation renderers, some blending modes, which are effects that are available in lots of graphic software. I think QGIS is still unique in having blending modes incorporated, and they may have been just introduced to ArcGIS Pro, but they've been in QGIS for quite a while, and they allow you to do some pretty fantastic effects. We'll then look at rendering points, because there are some often specific problems or challenges you have when rendering points when they're densely clustered. So we'll look at some of the tools QGIS has for that. And then we're going to look at how to create some coastal cartographic effects. The second session, we'll look at some cartographic processing algorithms in the toolbox. We'll look at expression-based symbology, and the expression engine in QGIS is really its secret superpower. And we can instead of clicking through inputs, we can actually write expressions to make more powerful inputs to symbology and processing tools. And that'll segue into geometry generators, which allow you to basically transmute the geometry of a layer using an expression. So it's very powerful. Then we'll look at the temporal controller, which I know Hans will be very interested in, which allows you to animate data that has a time component. We'll then look at the native QGIS 3D environment. Again, you can create animations there with kind of 3D fly-throughs. And then we'll look at mesh data, which is a new data model that's kind of exciting. It's if you've ever heard of triangulated irregular networks, it's kind of similar to that. And it's we're going to look at some weather data for some large Danish storms and see how we can symbolize that. And this also it's also temporal data, so that'll tie it together into the temporal controller as well. So you will have a recording of this session. I also will provide you, when I give the assignment at the end of today, the assignment will include short videos of each procedure that I'm going through. So if you want to watch a 5 or 10 minute video on live layer effects, for example, you'll have that available. And then I'm also going to give you a document that has detailed step-by-step instructions for each procedure. So you can choose which way you want to follow along there. And then the Q&A sessions. And we'll take a break at the top of the hour here. So I want to first just begin with talking about color a little bit. QGIS has a fantastic color interface, and in the directions for some of these assignments, I'm going to be giving you RGB, red, blue, and green values that might look like this. So we can define colors a number of different ways. We can define them based on their hue, saturation, and value, or red, green, blue values, or hexadecimal, which is often used for with HTML and web programming. So I'll show you where this lives in QGIS, this color panel, but we can use these sliders to choose colors and it will adjust the values accordingly. So here we have the same color and it's defined here via hue, saturation, and value, red, green, blue. There's an opacity slider, and it also gives you the hexadecimal equivalent of that color. So QGIS works with all the major color models and makes it really easy to define colors and find the perfect color for an application. With hue, saturation, and value, it's one of the more useful ways to think about the structure of colors. So we have the hue, which is basically the color wheel that goes from green to blue to red to yellow, all the primary colors. Within a particular color, such as red, we have the saturation, which is basically where between pure white and pure red that color lies. And then we have the value, which is where between black and white that color lies. And so you end up with this triangle for the color red, and you can choose any variant of red within this triangle by basically dragging your cursor in QGIS into the triangle and choosing the perfect red for your application in that case. So I'll show this when we get into QGIS in a second. The other really fantastic thing about QGIS is the tremendous number of rendering options it includes. So if we look at point, for example, these are the renderers for points. So normally when we first bring a layer into QGIS, it'll be symbolized with a single symbol, a red point. But we can also choose categorized and graduated. So these would be categorized where you would want to define different types of points by type, maybe species of tree, for example. Or graduated might be if you have a numeric attribute and you want to size the points based on that. So maybe you have, for trees, maybe we have the diameter of the trunk as an attribute, and you could use a graduated renderer to make the points bigger or smaller based on that value. So those are fairly standard, and they come with line and polygon too. We then have rule-based, and that's where you can define a rule for that using an expression. But then we get into some more interesting ones that we'll look at here. For example, point displacement, point cluster, and heat map. So these are all renderers that come with QGIS for dealing with points that are tightly clustered. So we'll look at those. And I know that most people here have probably had some experience with map info. So when you see embedded symbols here, that's a renderer for map info tab files. Is one example where there's embedded symbology, and QGIS will automatically recognize that and set the rendering engine for a tab file to embedded symbols, and it will render it exactly the way it was rendered in map info. That's a fairly new feature. That it's also will work for KML and KMZ as well. For raster, we also have hillshade and contour renderers, which are fantastic. So you can just render an elevation data set as contours or a hillshade. For polygon, we have this interesting one called inverted polygons, where it will invert the polygon. So if you have, for example, a polygon for Denmark, and you use inverted polygons, it will make Denmark a whole, and the polygon will be everything outside of Denmark. And there's some interesting use cases for using that we'll see. So we have all these renderers, and then we have these things called symbol layer types that can be used in combination with any of these renderers. And so the number of choices for symbolizing things quickly becomes almost exponential, or the choices are limitless. So for example, if we're going to use inverted polygons, we can also choose to use a shape burst fill with that. And we're going to see an example of that in a minute. There's also geometry generator, which I talked about, and that's available for all 3 different vector geometries. So these are coming online all the time. There's more and more. For example, in QGIS 3.2.4 that was recently released, it introduced line burst and raster line symbols for lines. And then for polygons, there's these outline renderers. So for a polygon, if you don't want to have a fill, these are other ways of symbolizing the polygon without a fill and having different versions of the line boundary of the polygon. And you can see there's another one that's coming online in a few, maybe a month or two, when QGIS 3.2.6 will come out. There's going to be animated markers for points, which allow you to use animated GIFs as the symbol for a point. So it's truly one of the incredible parts of QGIS that you can do almost any effect when you start using all of these different renderers combined with symbol layer types. So we're going to start this morning looking at custom legend patches. And these will really elevate any map, because instead of just having a point, a line, or a rectangle for your features on the legend, you can use patch shapes which really look like the actual features on the map. In fact, you can create your own custom legend patch shapes from actual features on the map, which is fantastic. So we're going to look at that this morning. And before this is the style manager. And So QGIS comes with this thing called the Style Manager that allows you to organize all your symbols, everything from markers, lines, and polygon fills to color ramps for rasters, text formats for like title fonts on a print layout, label settings, and then 3D symbols as well. And all of these can be tagged. So you can come up with different tags for all of these. So a tag by customer, a tag by project or topic. So you can easily find all the symbols that you need to work with regularly. So the first thing we're going to look at this morning is, after that, is live layer effects. And layer effects allow you to incorporate these different things like drop shadows, inner glows, outer glows with polygon features or line or point, and either one. So this can also, there are ways to quickly lift things off of a busy map. So one of the first things you need to consider when you're making a map is what the focus of that map is. And the map reader should see within the first milliseconds of looking at that map what the topic is. And if that's getting lost in a busy background, some of these things can be used for that purpose. An outer glow or a drop shadow will lift things off, but we can do even more with these, as you'll see. So we're going to look at bathymetry and this kind of crazy map on the right, which is the distance to the coast from different places in Denmark. We'll then look at blending modes, and these are occur in 4 different groups. We have the lighten group, the darken group, the contrast group, and then the inversion group down here. And these are just fantastic ways to, for example, blend polygons with terrain. So we'll see some use cases for blending modes. And not only do we have blending modes available at the layer level, but we also have blending modes available at the feature level. And so we're going to look at why you might want to use that. And point renderers, as I mentioned, so here's a series of points in Denmark. And instead of choosing the simple point marker, I can choose point cluster, which will show me, again, how many points are clustered at each location, which is based on the scale that you're looking at. So one example of using one of these different renderers and how quick it is to apply them. And then we'll finish up the morning looking at coastal effects. On the left is this effect called an inverted polygon shape burst fill, because it's using the inverted polygon renderer with the shape burst fill symbol layer type. And so the water is actually created from the land layer using an inverted polygon. So it allows you to do things without actually having data for it, like symbolize the sea. And then we're going to look at another example called Ben Ray dots here, which is another way of symbolizing the coast. Going into next week, we're going to look at topological coloring algorithms and expression-based symbols. We'll then go into geometry generators, which again allow you to modify geometries. So you can, for example, have a polygon layer and render that as centroids instead of the polygon. So you're actually rendering that polygon at that point as a point layer, even though on disk it's still a polygon layer. So for example, here's the municipalities in Denmark. I can duplicate the layer and turn on this copy of the layer. And instead of using a simple fill, I change the symbol layer type to geometry generator. I can then choose the geometry that I want to use. In this case, I'm choosing point. Dollar geometry is the geometry of every municipality, and I'm feeding that into the centroid function here so that I suddenly have the municipalities symbolized with their centroid. We'll also look at the temporal controller, which is a fairly new feature of QGIS, which allows you to create animations like this, which will, any data that has a temporal component can be animated through time. The 3D environment, which allows you, it grows every release. It's still fairly new and there's lots of new features, but it has a kind of nice intuitive 3D navigation panel. And you can work with every major vector model in here. We can use extrude vector features into 3D space. We can work with elevation data. We can work with mesh data. So it's fantastic. Point clouds as well. And then we'll finish up with displaying and animating mesh weather data in QGIS. And so mesh data is this hybrid data model. It's kind of a collection of vertices, edges, and faces. And it's often used for weather data, hydrological data, and things that are produced by modeling software. And there's various structures for mesh data. And we're going to be looking at a couple large Danish storms and symbolizing this data and then animating it through time so that you can actually see the passage of time and how the storm passed over Denmark, with the wind speed being shown here. Wind speed and wind direction. So that's a brief introduction. So let me go ahead and bring up QGIS. So some of the data that I'm going to provide you is in a GeoPackage format. Are people here familiar with GeoPackage? Anne Marie is laughing because I just had a course with her last week and she just learned about it. So, you know, the most common vector format in GIS is the Esri shapefile, but the shapefile has some problems. It's limited to 10 characters for field names, for example. And the GeoPackage is a database format that allows you to store multiple things within the GeoPackage. You can have multiple GIS layers in there. You can also store symbology in a GeoPackage, and you can also store QGIS projects in there. So the first project we're going to open up is actually saved into a GeoPackage. So to open a project that's saved into a GeoPackage, I'm going to, instead of choosing open from QGIS, I'm going to choose open from. And I get the choice of either PostgreSQL, which is also a database you can store a PostGIS project into, but I'm going to choose GeoPackage. And then I simply have to identify the GeoPackage that has my QGIS project in it. Click open, and then it shows me I can have multiple projects in a QGIS package. I'm going to choose the project named Denmark and click OK to open it. I can also open a project in a GeoPackage from the browser panel. So this is the browser panel in QGIS, in case you aren't familiar with it. And this allows you to browse your hard drive for GES data. It also has connections to various databases and other formats such as WMS, WFS. And in here, we can save favorites. You can right click on a folder and choose to save it as a favorite. So I've saved the data visualization course material as a favorite, so I can easily find it now. And if I expand a GeoPackage in the browser panel, it will show me all the vector layers that are in there, but it also shows me those two QGIS projects. And I could open those from here just by dragging and dropping the QGIS project onto the map canvas. So that would be another way to open this. So this is just a simple map kind of focused on the Moens Klint in that area of Denmark. And first I'll show you this water layer. If I hover over this and see the source for this, I can see that this is actually being sourced from the Kommune layer. So it's the same layer here as municipalities, but I'm the reason this is working as water is because I'm using the inverted polygon renderer for it. And before I go further with this, I should mention that we're going to be using this layer styling panel a lot. If you aren't familiar with this, you will be by the end of this course. So I can go, historically, I can double click on a layer and open up the layer properties and use the symbology tab to define the symbology and then click OK to see the result. But there's a little button here right under the layers panel called open the layer styling panel, or you can use F7. If I click on this button, it opens this panel off to the right. And this gives me access to all the QGIS symbology, but the changes I make are instantaneous. So it's has some definite advantages. For example, if I chose the municipalities layer, if I click on that here, that becomes the target layer here in the layer styling panel. And I can see that this layer has a fill. And if I want to change the fill versus the outline, I would select the simple fill component. And now it gives me the fill color and the stroke color. And to show you where the color model lives that I introduced, I can click on this color and I will get this same color picker that I showed you in the PowerPoint, where I have the hue, saturation, and value and the RGB for that color and even the hexadecimal. And this color wheel also pops up, which is basically using that hue, saturation, and value. So here I can drag this dot around within this triangle, which is this one hue of brown. And I can change the color until it's, one that I like for the map. And so this interactive picking of colors with the layer styling panel is fantastic, because you can also do it this way. I can click the drop down from here and also sit here and say, oh, I'd like it to be a little lighter or a little brighter, and you can find just the perfect color interactively, which is really nice. The other thing I should point out here, so yeah, water, this is using the inverted polygon renderer. So it's making it, it's the Kamuna is the layer, but when I invert it, it equals the water, basically. And then I'm using that with this symbol layer type called a shape burst fill that basically lets you go between two colors and blend it from one color to the next. So I'm choosing a dark blue and a light blue and blending this. So I'm getting this inverted polygon shape burst fill. And that's one really quick way to symbolize water without having to create or find data for it. And the benefit is that it matches the Kamuna layer perfectly because it's the inversion of it. It's based on it. I also have this forests layer on here, and this is using another interesting symbology effect in here. So there's a simple fill, which is again the default symbol component for polygons, and I've just chosen a light green and a dark green for the fill color and the stroke. But then in QGIS, you can also click this add button to add a symbol layer. So I've done this to add this symbol layer here, which is a random marker fill. Random marker fill being one of these symbol layer types for polygons, and you can see there's quite a few. And a random marker fill lets you put some kind of point randomly within the bounds of that polygon. So if I zoom in, it will change. And here I changed the marker to an SVG marker. And an SVG marker allows me, I just use one of the default SVG symbols that comes with QGIS in the library here for a tree, and I made them green. If I switch back to this random marker fill, there's a lot of controls in here. So I chose a density-based count versus an absolute count, and chose values that I thought worked well. So you can use very quickly set up symbols like this that use multiple symbol layer types and multiple components to come up with a more interesting, intuitive symbol other than just a green polygon. So the exercise here, now that we understand the symbology a little bit more, is going to be based around the print layout and label blocking. So this project has a simple layout as part of it. So I can access that from the project menu. If I go down to layouts, I'll see it has a single layout, named layout. So I'll open this up. And it's just a simple map, and it has a title, a legend, a north arrow, and a scale bar. And it has this label here on the Baltic Sea. And I may want to move the title, for example. You know, I might want to make this wrap onto a second line and be moved in the region of the map where that Baltic Sea label is. And then that creates a problem because I have a conflict between my two pieces of text. And in QGIS now, I can put a setting onto the map that will avoid label conflicts. So I can select the map object. And if you haven't worked with print layouts much, I wasn't planning on really introducing all the functionality in a print layout, but basically you select an object such as the map and you work with this item properties tab. And when you have the map selected, you're going to have properties of the map. If I have the title text selected, then I'm going to have properties of that text on the item properties. So the item properties will change depending on which object you have selected. And so here I want to select the map. And there's a small label settings button now on item properties tied to my map. And I can select that label properties item. And there's this section here called label blocking items. So what I can do is say, okay, I want the title text to be a label blocking item. So I'll check the box, and that Baltic Sea label is going to get out of the way of the title text. It's going to move to avoid it. So I can do this with any object. If I move this title up here and then say I want the, you can see the label go back to where it was originally set. And maybe I then want to put the legend up there. So what I can do is set the legend to also be a label blocking item. And if I then move the legend up here, that label will again get out of its way. So this is a really nice feature that can really just kind of automate some of your work and make it so these collisions just aren't there, instead of having to adjust label positions and things like that. So the next thing we're going to look at is legend patch shapes. So by default on a print composition, you just have a straight line for roads, a rectangle for polygons, and if we had points, we would just have points. But there is a new feature in QGIS called legend patch shapes. And where I'm going to see this is in the style manager. So if I minimize my print layout and get back to the main QGIS window, I can get into the style manager from this button right below settings here. It's on the main QGIS toolbar here. So I can open up the style manager. Oh, wrong screen. So here's my style manager. And I can use the style manager to browse all of my styles. So I can choose the markers, which are for points, lines, fills, and this is mostly still just the default symbols that ship with QGIS. The color ramps, text formats, if I want to save a title font, label settings, and then there's legend patch shapes. And QGIS doesn't come with any legend patch shapes, but there is a handy way to import some legend patch shapes. So there is an online repository for legend patch shapes that the QGIS community has set up. So this is a GitHub repo. I'll paste this into the chat. And it allows you to basically download a whole package of legend patch shapes and just import them into QGIS. And so the one we're going to work with, the one that's kind of the best general assortment, is this one from Klaus Carlson. He's a Swedish QGIS guru. So I'm going to click on the link for his legend patch XML. And it opens up the XML, but I need to click on the raw button to get the XML to just open in the browser so that I have just a URL to this legend patch XML file. And all I need to do is Control-C to copy this URL. Now what I'm going to do is in my style manager, choose import export. Import item. And in the import items window, I can import from a file or a URL. So I'm going to choose the URL setting and just paste that URL in here and click fetch items. And it retrieves all of the legend patch shapes in that XML file. And I can, in the style manager, if I want to create tags, I can create them here. I could type class Carlson, you know, or what have you. I could choose to add it to favorites or do not import embedded tags. You have some options here. And then I can click select all and import. So now I can see I suddenly have legend patch shapes in my style manager. And these are, you know, much more intuitive, most of them. I have some nice ones for roads. I have, even for points, some interesting clusters of points, which can be more like your data than a simple point. Some river icons, building icons, etc. So I can click close now that I have those in my style manager. And the style manager is tied to your QGIS user profile. Do people know about QGIS profiles? No. Yes and no. So if I go to the settings menu, there is a user profile section, and you can see I have quite a few profiles set up. These are the profiles store your symbology. They store which plugins you have installed, which toolbars and panels you have on, kind of those general user settings. Get the language. If you have the Danish translation of QGIS, that would be part of the profile. You can see I have a Danish profile. So there's different reasons for creating profiles. I'm right now using the teaching profile so that I have a lot of the kind of a default load of QGIS for teaching. So it looks like what you're going to be working with. And the profile in QGIS will be set up here in square brackets. So that's teaching is the profile that I'm currently in. Denmark is the name of the QGIS project file. So I'm going to bring up the print composition, and I'm going to select the legend now that I have those legend patch shapes. And when I select the legend, I can see all the different legend items here. So for example, I could double click on roads, and this is where I could change the name of this. I can down below see there's a section called patch. And by default, it's using just the straight line default patch. But if I click that patch shape, I can, the first thing I see is this line string with a bunch of numbers. So this is basically a QGIS function called line string that takes a series of coordinate locations for the line. So this is just creates a straight line. So I don't want that. What I want to do is clear out this, and this is basically a small version of my symbol manager here that shows me the symbols that I have for legend patch shapes that would work for lines. So I have some contours, rivers, so roads. I can choose roads, and you'll see that now my legend patch shape has changed to that. And you can see basically the code for this legend patch shape. It's a multi-line string function with a series of coordinates after it. I can also choose to preserve the aspect ratio or not of this. And when I get back here, there's a default width and height, which I think is 7 millimeters wide by 3 millimeters high. You can change that here, so you can increase the shape, the size of a patch. I can also choose to use different legend patch shapes for different parts of this layer. So maybe the primary roads, I could choose a different patch for. I could choose roads 2 for that. Or so you can, and have complete freedom to change those as you wish. And then for municipalities, I could change that to something like that, coast. And then maybe I want to make this a little bit bigger, so I can increase the size of the patch until it looks like I want it to on the legend. So that's it's very quick and easy to use those, and once you have them imported, they're there for you to use. I can also create a legend patch shape from one of my features. So I didn't see anything in there that was really useful for a forest. But what I can do is choose one of these forests and create a legend patch shape from that feature. And it's fairly straightforward workflow to do that. And normally when I want to do this, I want to find a feature that is representative of the features on the map, like kind of the average forest shape. But I also want to choose one that's not going to be overly complicated. If I choose this forest boundary here, it may not make a very nice looking legend patch shape on a legend on the map. But this one here is a more rounded, organic looking shape here. So I think I will choose that one. And to make a legend patch shape out of it, I simply select the feature. So this is the select features button here. And I want to have forests as the selected layer, the active layer in my layers panel. And then I click on that forest to select it, and it turns yellow because I have that feature selected. And then I'm going to put this layer into edit mode by toggling on editing. And I have this one feature selected, and that on this digitizing toolbar, there's a copy button. So I can choose copy features, and it basically puts the JSON for that feature on my clipboard. I can now take this out of edit mode, and then I can bring up my style manager, go to my legend patch shapes tab in here, and there's a plus button down here to add an item. So I can add a new fill legend patch shape. It gives me this default code for a rectangle using the polygon function, and I'm going to remove that. I'm just going to backspace through that, and I'm going to use Control V to paste in the geometry of that feature from my clipboard. And it creates this really crazy looking, text on here. Where's it? Trying to find the division between these two boxes so I can expand that. It's not working. So when you do this, not only is it copying the geometry, but all the attributes. I don't really need that to be part of my legend patch shape. So you always need to look at the end of the expression here for these 3 closing parentheses. They're always there. And you want to delete everything after those. So I'm just going to select all the text after those closing parentheses and delete it. And then I'm going to scroll to the top. And you'll see the beginning of the function, multi-polygon Z in this case. And I'm just going to delete all the field names before that so that I end up with just multi-polygon Z and the 3 closing parentheses. So then I can just click, well, you can tag it. You can choose how you want to tag it. And I can click OK. Did I miss? I missed a step. My apologies. Oh no, it just here it is. Always end up on my other monitor. Okay, so it gives me this option to name the patch. So I can call this forest and then give it a tag. You know, maybe I'm going to have a conservation or coastal tourism tag or something like that. And I'll click save. And now it adds that as one of my patches. It's not tagged. If I wanted to, I could right click on this and choose add to favorites, or I could add other tags to it. And this is just the way the style manager works. You can always go in and tag your styles anytime you want to put them into a more organized context for yourself. So I'll click close. And now I can bring up my layout again. And I can select my legend and apply this to the forests. And now I can maybe, especially when you're using a random marker fill like this, sometimes you have to increase the patch a little bit to get more of the symbols showing up in it so that it looks a little bit more like what you see on the map. But now I have a more intuitive looking legend for my map with a new style that I can use over and over again. So through time, you'll find yourself developing a nice library of legend patch shapes that meet different data needs that you have. Okay, so we have a couple more minutes and then we'll take a break. And I think I'll start showing you live layer effects. So I'm going to open up, this project is not in a geo package, it's just a QGIS file, and it's in the layer effects folder here, and it's called bathymetry. So I'm just going to open this by dragging the bathymetry project onto my map canvas. And I'm not going to change my project. I'll discard my changes. And I have a map that opens up with a series of bathymetry layers, which is a fancy name for the depth of the ocean. And these are polygon layers. They're from an online source called Natural Earth. And Natural Earth is a really nice repository of kind of just general cartographic boundaries and features that are all global. And so this has a series of layers for different depths of the ocean. And so what I'm going to do is enable the effects for this. So far in the layer styling panel, we've just looked at the basic aspects of a symbol. But down below that, there's this layer rendering section that's collapsed by default. And I'm going to expand it. And you'll see there's settings for blending modes, which we'll look at next. And then there's this thing called draw effects. So I'm just going to check draw effects. And in this situation, I've already set the effect on each one of these layers. And all I have to do is enable effects. And then I'll show you what the effect is once we start to see the result. So you can see after I've started enabling the effects, you can kind of watch the coast of the east coast of the US and see what's starting to occur there. So one of the most common effects people use is just adding a drop shadow to lift something off a map or an outer glow. This is using a different one of the effects to kind of create this pseudo 3D, maybe 2.5D view of the bathymetry of the seas. I don't think there's any depths this deep in the Atlantic. I think that's the Marianas Trench. But you see, now we have this cool effect where we are seeing a kind of a shadow along each layer of this bathymetry. And to set the effect, I click the little yellow star so we can see what this is. So this is an inner shadow. So an inner shadow has been applied to each one of these layers to create this. And with any of these effects, if you have it selected here, you have controls for it. So you can choose, in this case, the orientation of the shadow, the length of the shadow, this thing called blur radius, which is how smooth the shadow edge is, the color of the shadow. And so that's all this is simply applying an inner shadow. And I think all I did was change the color and reduce the default width of it. And you get this really cool effect. There's also drop shadow and outer glow. So if I chose, drop shadow, for example, I could, if I wanted to apply that to land, I would expand layer rendering, enable effects, click this little yellow star, and I could give the land a drop shadow. And that you can see what that does. And then I could change the color of this drop shadow for the land to make it a little more or less strong, and adjust all the different parameters of it. There's also this effect drop down. So if I click this, there's a couple more in this list. This is kind of a funky interface. This was added quite a while ago, 7 or 8 years ago, and it's never really been re-engineered. So I think it's probably time for them to just make the full list here. But right now, if I wanted to use transform or blur or colorize, what I would do is choose one of these and click the one I wanted and add that to the list, and then use that set and configure it the way I wanted to.
But why would you use an inner shadow at all in the first place?
Well, this is one use case for it. This bathymetry, creating this effect for bathymetry.
Yeah, but I mean, the difference between a drop shadow and an inner shadow is more or less the same, isn't it? At this scale.
Yeah. So, but when I think when I first did this, the drop shadow was not giving such a 3D appearance as the inner shadow was.
Okay, makes sense.
The inner shadow kind of does the opposite side of the polygon. It kind of creates a shadow inside the bounds of the polygon, where a drop shadow creates a shadow kind of underneath the polygon. So if we could just create a temporary layer and experiment with that and kind of create a sandbox and try the different effects maybe after our break, and we can see what that would do. But one interesting thing here is for this land layer where I've given it a drop shadow, if I go back to that effects menu, the source is the original symbology of the layer, and you can actually turn that off. So I could just have the land just be the drop shadow without the symbology appear. And again, there's not too many use cases for this, but it's possible. And so sometimes just being creative and tinkering with these things with different sets of data can give really interesting effects. So I just want to let you know that it is possible to just have the effect, such as an outer glow, without the symbology of the layer being part of it. So it's kind of interesting. Another to segue here, the land is, oh, I don't have that as part of this. Never mind. It's a different project. We'll look at that next. So let's take a 10-minute break for coffee and toilet, and we'll come back at 10 after.
Thanks. See you.
So that was a good question, Hans. I just created a quick temporary scratch polygon on this map, and we can look at what some of those effects, how they work. So if I have this simple polygon and I choose draw effects and open up the effects properties, I could implement just a default drop shadow for this, and it is oriented to the southeast, and I get that shadow on that side. If I instead choose an inner shadow, it's going to shadow the interior of the polygon on the opposite side. Of course, you can tinker with these controls, and you can set the radius how you want. Oops, I have to choose the correct effect here. You have to have the correct one selected, or you're not changing the right thing. So you could, configure these controls as you wish, but you can see what an inner shadow does. It kind of almost sinks the feature inwards versus a drop shadow, which kind of raises it above. And then you have outer glow, which will produce this kind of a halo effect around a feature. And then you have, with an outer glow, that's a single color, but you can also use color ramps for outer glows. So you could, for example, make this a blues outer glow, and you can do all kinds of things.
Truly ugly.
Yes, and make it as ugly as you want. And then the inner glow is going to, do the glow around the interior. So those are basically what the effects do. And then, like I said, with every one, you can configure them. And
they were on your first slide, these inner and outer glows shadows. But my question was more, why would you choose on an inner shadow rather than an outer drop shadow?
Yeah, well, I guess it's because one is going to tend to kind of visually lift the feature off the map, and one's going to kind of
one is going to dip it. Yeah, got it.
Yep.
Are these things happening in QGIS memory, or are they happening down at PostGIS?
Oh no, they're all happening in memory, saved as part of the project. Yes.
So it means in principle everything have to be loaded into memory before these things will happen. So if you have a huge data set sitting in a PostGIS database, it will take a time.
Yeah, but I've always found the rendering on these to be fairly fast. This is all done in C++. So it's all compiled code. It's sent in, and all these things tend to perform fairly well even on large data sets. So,
okay.
Yeah. The next example, let's see, is another project in a Geo package. So this is something I was having fun with during this thing called the November Map Challenge last year. And I just occurred to me how close to the coast you always are in Denmark. And so I did this thing where I created a series of basically a multi-ring buffer in 5-kilometer intervals around Denmark. I realize there's an issue down here along the German border, but aside from that, it was kind of an interesting visual. and I thought that it would be interesting to use some effects to see what I could do with it. So if I apply a drop shadow to this, it's just going to put a drop shadow underneath the entire layer. But you can apply this at the feature level, individual polygon rings here. So this is, so I have what, 10 or so classes here. And I could go in and individually click each one of those and make a change to it. But if I want to make changes to all 10 symbols simultaneously, such as apply effect to each one, I can use this master symbol button up here. So if I click this, it opens up basically the symbol settings for each one of those individual classes. And so what I can then do is apply this effect at this level. So I'm going to choose the simple fill component, and I'm going to check draw effects down here and add a drop shadow. And it creates this really, what I think is really a cool looking effect. And you can, start tinkering with the drop shadow to make it a little less severe by reducing the length of the shadow. And one thing I find with the drop shadow, reducing the blur radius will usually make them be not quite as strong. And you get an effect like this by applying that drop shadow at the basically at the feature level instead of at the layer level. So you can think about that as you go ahead and apply effects to different features. And when I first saw this, I was like, wow, that's really cool. So it's not something that you'd see on a map produced by a Comuna or something like that, but it kind of gives you an idea of what you can start to, what the possibilities are when you are working with these. And here we see some, some strange shadowing artifacts around some of the islands. When you create a print layout from this and export it, they disappear. So sometimes when you're using an effect, you might see some kind of visual artifact like that, but they tend to disappear when you're exporting it as a real print composition. So there's a lot of different ways that you can use these effects. This is an example of using effects to kind of create neon cartography. So this is just using, and a lot of these effects will work better on a dark background. But this is basically using an outer glow on these flight paths that goes from the hot pink of the flight path line to the dark black background of the states. So the outer glow, basically is fading from the line to the background of the map. And that's another way to produce that. And then another symbol layer has been added, which is a lighter pink, thinner line on top, which kind of gives that kind of neon glow. And there's a drop shadow under the SVG icons of the airplanes to kind of enhance the effect a little bit too. So that's another neon cartography, or lightsaber maps, people sometimes call them. You can create these with layer effects. And then similarly, you can do, this is like a map of UFO sightings in Denmark I made last November, and just put a green outer glow around Denmark to kind of, go with the theme of aliens there. So just a couple more silly examples of what you can do with those. So the next thing we're going to look at is elevation data. So I have a Mount Rainier project here that I'm going to open. And I'll mention I also have a Moons Klint example that you can work with when you go through this. So you can work with some Danish data, but this is a particularly, it's a nice small data set of a pretty dramatic mountain. So it works well for showing what I'm about to show. So this is a DEM for Mount Rainier. in Washington State, outside of Seattle in the US. And it's a 4,000 meter volcano. And so we have this DEM, and the default symbology for a DEM is to use this single band gray renderer that basically stretches the elevation values from white to black, white being the highest point, black being the lowest. But I can also choose something like a hillshade instead to make this render as a hillshade, or I can choose a single band pseudo color to create a shaded version of this. So I'll start with the hillshade. And when I do that, it creates this hillshade version of this automatically for me. And one thing I'll point out when you're doing this, there's this resampling section down here that's part of this hillshade renderer. And you get the normal controls above for the direction of the sun. And you know, one thing with hill shading that's strange is that they tend for most people to look best if the terrain is being illuminated from the northwest, which can't happen in the real world. But for most people, if you switch the sun angle to a more natural sun direction, the terrain gets inverted visually. So the default setting works for most people, but you can change that, the altitude and the azimuth. So this resampling comes into play. The default setting is nearest neighbor for this. And if I zoom in on this with the nearest neighbor, you'll see this gridding or pixelating happening to the data as it's being rendered. So choosing the bilinear resampling smooths the rendering out and removes those artifacts. So that's the hillshade renderer. So now I'm going to duplicate this layer. I'll turn it off and turn on this copy. And so when you duplicate a layer, it's an exact replica, but I'm going to change the copy from using a hillshade to a single band pseudo color. And this allows me to, instead of having a black to white color ramp, to choose colors for my terrain. And it will usually switch the color ramp to whichever one you most recently used. And there are a lot of nice color ramps that come with QGIS with all these different ones. But we're going to import one from a library that QGIS has kind of tucked away. So if I click the menu next to color ramp, where I could choose one of these favorites, there's also an option to create a new color ramp. I can also edit this one. So I'm going to create a new color ramp. And I'm going to choose the type CPT city. You get several choices. Gradient would allow you to just create your own color ramp where you check this, choose the starting and ending color, or even intermediate colors, and design your own color ramp that grades between those colors. So that's certainly possible, but I'm going to choose CPT city. There it goes. So this is a collection of color ramps that ships with QGIS, but they're not in the style manager by default. And they're divided into categories. So we were just looking at bathymetry, and there's a series of bathymetric color ramps. But right now we're working with terrain. There's a topography section here. So there's, 15 or 20 color ramps here that you can choose from, and you can try different ones. Through experience, I tend to like the CDA or the SDA. So if I choose one of these and click OK, it will change the rendering of the DEM to that. And if this is one that I wanted to use over again and have in my symbol library, I can just click the drop down and choose Save Color Ramp. And I can just call this SDA and a colorful, and add to favorites, and click save. And now, since I've added it to favorites, I will now see that here in my first list of color ramps. So anytime you add a color ramp as a favorite, it shows up in this first list. The other color ramps are in this expanded list. So what I can do now is turn on the color hillshade, which blocks out my, turn on the hillshade, which blocks out the color DEM below it. And historically, if you were going to do a color hillshade effect, you would just change the opacity. I would make this hillshade kind of semi-transparent so that I could see the colors come through. And there's usually a sweet spot around 50–60%. But this is an imperfect solution because I can either make it almost completely transparent and I start to lose some of the detail in the hillshade, but I see more of the colors, or I make it more opaque and I don't see the colors so strongly. So blending modes offer a much more elegant solution to this. So if I go back to the main symbol tab for my hillshade, I can choose a blending mode. And there are blending modes divided into 4 groups. This is the lighten group. This is the darken group. This is the overlay group. And this is the inversion group. And multiply is the one people most often use. And this is the most common use case. And it makes this kind of perfect blending between the colors and the detail and the hillshade simultaneously. And then there's one more renderer that we can experiment with. So if I make one more copy of this layer, duplicate it, and I'll drag this one as the uppermost layer. And just to keep these straight, I can rename this layer. I can rename it, I'm going to call it contours, because I'm going to use the contour renderer on this version of it. So now it's become kind of dark and saturated because we have 2 hillshades on top of one another with this multiply blending mode. Let me turn the blending mode off. And I'm going to, instead of hillshade, use the contour renderer for this. And sometimes you have to remove this, reduce this input downscaling. There they are. So now we can see the contours on the map. And by default, the contour interval is 100 and the index contour interval is 500. Index contours are every 5th contour. And it actually works fairly well for this area, the default values, but you can change those. I'm going to change the index contour symbol to a thicker line. So you can start to see those index contours on the map. And now I can also apply a blending mode to these to make them kind of blend into the map a little bit more and be there without being having such visual weight. So I found that for these, some of these overlay blending modes work really well. We can try overlay. So you can still see the contours there, but they're just not standing out so much. They're a little more part of the map. Soft light.
But when blending in, how do you select what it blends in with? Is that whatever is on or turned on below, or what?
Yes, it's going to blend with whatever is underneath. So you set the blending for the topmost layer, and that's going to affect how it interacts with layers beneath it.
Check.
So there, with just a few tweaks, I have created a nice visualization of Mount Rainier in this case, with both a color hillshade effect and contours. And I only used one layer. I just duplicated it and created different styles based on those. And we use two different blending modes in that exercise. And one nice thing about QGIS is that blending modes are also available for just other features. For example, in a print layout, if I open up the one layout associated with this project, it just has just a square map with the terrain. While this renders. So it's going to have a title, a color ramp, signature for fork line, legend, and a logo here. And there it goes. Why did the elevation disappear? Let me add elevation back in. There we go. QGIS also now has better in the legend symbols for these graduated raster layers. And so I can go in here and I can increase the height of this raster legend, and I can obviously change the name and other things with it too. So it's still a fairly new feature in QGIS, but what I'm here to show you more specifically is this logo made with QGIS. So it's fine if your company logo is there, but and sometimes people will have a version of a company logo with transparent backgrounds and things like that, but you don't really need that with QGIS. You can simply expand the rendering section on item properties for this image, and you can apply a multiply blending mode to this logo, and it will strip out the white parts and just leave us with the black. And so you can try different blending modes in here. Some of these will give kind of interesting effects with fading things out. Some won't change anything. And the addition is kind of the opposite of multiply in this case, where it strips away inverts all the colors and makes the white transparent and the black white. So you can try some of these. Just remember they're there because they can really help. They're available for everything, even the legend. Will have a layer rendering section for every object, and you can apply a blending mode to anything. So sometimes these will certainly help. Another new feature in QGIS is now on a print layout. If we want to give some nicer text from this Mount Rainier title, if you click on the font button, these settings that were only available for labels previously are now available for all the text on the layout. So I can give a drop shadow to the title or give a text buffer around the label, so the text stands out better. Questions on the blending modes or working with terrain? The next project we look at is going to be a map that shows all the OpenStreetMap roads for Denmark, and we're zoomed into Zealand here. And we again have a dark background to this map with the roads being bright blue. And we're going to look at feature blending. So with the elevation data and the contours, we were blending the entire layer using a layer blending mode. With vector data, such as this roads layer, when we expand layer rendering, we have a layer blending mode and a feature blending mode. So if you apply a blending mode at the layer level, that is going to apply to the entire layer. And you may not see much of an effect. With all of these, it really depends on the colors that you're working with, including the background color. what will happen when you apply a blending mode. But one interesting use of blending modes is at the feature level. So here we have blue roads. And if you think of color theory, 255, 255, 255 is white in the RGB model, and 0, 0, 0 is black. And so if we change the feature blending mode to addition, it's going to take the RGB colors for these roads and add them, which will quickly become white. So where the road symbols are so tightly stacked that you're seeing multiple road symbols stacked on top of one another at this scale, it's going to make those brighter. And so a feature addition blending mode basically ends up showing road density. It's a way of visualizing it. So obviously we see Copenhagen, and we see all the summer house roads along the north coast. And this will change according to your zoom level. So if we zoom in, fewer roads are going to be stacked at that scale. So the visualization changes. It's very much a scale dependent rendering. So this will change as you increase the width of the road symbol and things like that.
That means, but by stacking, you mean stacking at the pixel level on the monitor.
Correct. Yes. So we're showing, you know, with most symbols, the symbol is much wider on the screen than the actual road in the real world. You know, it's, and so yeah, we're thinking in millimeters on the screen in this case. So that's one way, one use case of using this feature blending mode, and addition is one that works well with that. Another example of using that is this map of 24 hours of shipping traffic. I basically used the same technique where I had used a blue symbol for the shipping routes and used an addition multiply blending mode to kind of show the almost electrical looking brightness where there were dense shipping routes. Almost creates a linear heat map of sorts. Okay, so let's look at some points. We're gonna open up in the points folder, this points project. So a very similar map, but in this case, we have a point layer. Instead of roads, we have place names. These are again from OpenStreetMap. And we could use, honestly, a similar technique, the addition feature blending mode on these points to show the density of them. That could be another, you know, interesting visualization technique with these. But I want to show you some of these other point specific renderers. So here we certainly have points that are stacked on top of one another on the screen. The symbols are just very tightly clustered. And we can use, instead of the single symbol renderer, the point cluster renderer. And what this will do is put a cluster symbol where more than one point symbol is stacked on top of other point symbols. And it puts a number in that circle. And you can adjust the cluster symbol. So we can go in and see that this is using a combination of a simple marker with a red circle that's, you know, fairly large, and a font marker on top of that. So font marker is another one of these symbol layer types for points. And the font marker is basically is counting the number of points that get stacked there in this renderer. And we can actually see there's these little things off to the right we're going to look at the next class. These are data-defined overrides. And these are where you can point a symbol input to an attribute column, or you can use an expression for it. So down here, there's an expression being used. It's using the variable cluster size for the character. So it's counting the number of points at each location. And again, this will change as we zoom in and zoom out. We could change the simple marker to be a similar green as the rest of the points and change the font to be a dark color. So you can change the symbology for these as you need. So that's the cluster symbol. The single symbol will still be the symbol of the point, but you could choose at this point categorized or graduated symbology along with clusters. The render settings will get you at the original point color, and you could change that as you see fit.
Can you make the color according to the number of points in the cluster?
That's a good question.
Yeah, like a categorized, or not categorized, but a continuous scale. It's a
Yeah,
simple layer type.
Yeah. I think it would have to be something using cluster size and an expression with the
That was it.
color. So
Yeah.
you'd use a data defined override, and you'd come up with an expression. You click the edit button, and you'd use that cluster size variable. And there are also color symbols. So you have darker and lighter. So you could come up with an expression that used darker or lighter in a mathematical expression with the cluster size to change the color. I'm sure I wouldn't be able to come up with it on the spot, but that's how you do it. So these are really important and really powerful and really allow you to do almost anything. So there is also a heat map renderer here. So let me duplicate places here. And instead of point cluster, I'll choose heat map. And heat map generates basically a heat map on the fly. There are processing algorithms for generating heat maps, but this will generate a heat map based on visually what's overlapping, at the search radius in millimeters on the screen at the time. And you can choose different color ramps. Make more sense to invert that. And then you could increase or decrease the search radius. You can weight the points as well. So you could weight them by population in this case. And Copenhagen is certainly going to pop out in that situation. And then in layer rendering, we could give a blending mode to this so that we can still see the national boundaries underneath. And so sometimes it's important to develop your own raster-based file of a heat map using various interpolation tools, but this is another way to just quickly render a point data set as a heat map. And sometimes for a visualization, that's all that's required. So what we're going to finish up with this morning is coastal effects. And we're basically going to learn how to create a coastal vignette. So we have a map similar to the one we started with this morning, with municipalities. The forests are turned off. We have the roads. And in this case, if we want to represent the sea, we can use this inverted polygon shape burst fill technique. So the first step is going to be to duplicate municipalities. And I'll just rename this C and turn that on. So we have two duplicate layers now. And we're going to, instead of Just catch up. Instead of the single symbol renderer, we're going to choose inverted polygons. So suddenly we have now a brown ocean. And all we have to do is go down here to simple fill. And we could just use the simple fill renderer and change this to blue. And that's hideous. There we go. And be done with it. But we can do a little bit better than that. We can change from a simple fill to a shape burst fill. And the shape burst fill is going to allow us to choose two colors that this is going to blend between. So for the top color, I can enter a value for blue. And then for the bottom color, a darker blue. That's pretty special. And we get a little bit of a gradation now. This is now using the whole shape setting. And we're going to change that instead of whole shape to set distance. And this lets me set the distance from the polygon edge that the colors fade into one another. So we could increase this from the default 5 up to say 7 to give a little broader spread. And then we can also, I find increasing the blur strength helps. This is basically how smooth the transition is from one color to the next on our 2-color system here. So if we increase this blur strength, you can see we'll just get a smoother and smoother transition. And it becomes a little more natural looking if we increase that. So you can experiment with what you like for the blur strength there. But we quickly, in just a few moments, have created a much nicer looking ocean effect. And technically, the ocean usually goes from intuitively light to dark, but sometimes it looks nice too to even to reverse it and go from dark to light. So you can experiment with that. And the last thing we're going to look at that's related to this is this technique called Ben Ray dots. So this is another kind of popular cartographic technique. Ben Ray dots, I think, is the technology in newsprint, where pictures on a newspaper are actual dots, grayscale dots that make the photograph. And so we can kind of use a similar effect in QGIS to create some of these kind of blue dots in the ocean to give it that effect. So I'm going to duplicate the municipalities again. I'll call this dots. Keep it straight. Turn this on. And I'll turn off this layer for now. And what we're going to do is, again, use the inverted polygon renderer for this. And instead of a shape burst fill, like we just used, we're going to use the is it random marker or point pattern? Yeah, point pattern fill. So point pattern fill is similar to what I was using for the forests. This creates a regular point pattern fill initially with red dots, but we can tweak the horizontal and vertical spacing of these. So I can set this to 1,5, and I'm going to basically putting those dots very close together. And then I'm going to change the vertical to 1,2, and now it just looks like a red sea. So let's quickly take care of the dots so that we can see what we're doing. We're going to reduce the size of those. And hey, we'll make them blue instead of red. And we're going to use a stroke style of no pen so that they don't have an outline. Now we just have these blue dots covering the sea. And you can see they're kind of a regular grid at this point. But if I select the point pattern fill component again, what I can do is tweak the horizontal displacement. So there's a displacement for horizontal and vertical here. So I can set this to I think something like 0.75. And you can see now they're more irregularly spaced. They're disjointed, almost like bricks in a building. So a little couple tweaks to the point pattern fill creates this effect. And now I'm going to add to my symbol by clicking this green plus button and adding a new symbol layer to it. And by default, the new symbol for polygons will always be a simple fill. But I'm going to change this to the shape burst fill. So I'm combining a shape burst with a point pattern fill. So I'm going to make the first color completely transparent. And so sometimes there's a weird quirk. Maybe they fixed this. Historically, depending on some versions of QGIS I'm using, I may have to set this color to white first and then to transparent. And I haven't figured out why that is, but it's sometimes helps. It might be a bug. And the second color is white. And now I'm going
Triggers the trade.
Yeah, exactly. Little tricks. I'm going to use the set distance method again. And so now you can see that we have this shape burst fill. So we only see those dots near the coast. And I can reduce the size of that so they're a little closer to the coast and increase the blur strength way up to the maximum here. And I'm not sure how well this shows online, but when you do it yourself, you will see it a little better. And finally, I'm going to apply a blending mode. So I'm going to give this a blending mode of multiply, which just allows us to see a little bit more of the dots along the coast. And so again, it's just one of these subtle techniques that can be kind of interesting. And now we can turn on the sea layer below. And we have the dots combined with the sea. So you can see near the coast now, you kind of get this stippling effect. So this is a classic cartographic technique called Ben Ray dots. And it's just another way that you can set a map of a coast off, and kind of shows you how you can start to combine some of these symbol layer types using a point pattern fill with a shape burst fill in this case to get different effects, incorporating a blending mode, and then the sea layer itself using the inverted polygon shape burst fill. So you can see how you can start to combine these different layers. In fact, you could incorporate all of this into one layer. I did it in two different layers as I was showing you this, but you could do all of this as one. And then to tie back into the symbol layer manager, if this is a symbol that I would like to use in the future, I can click Save Symbol and call this, Ben Ray dots. Add it to favorites, click Save. And now in my style manager, I'll see that symbol here and I can use it over and over and over again. So once you've put some time into developing something that you think is nice and that you want to reapply over and over again, you can just save it as a style in your style manager.
Can you suppress, in this case, we have multi-features for the for the municipalities, and accordingly, the Svendborg is mentioned 3 times. And earlier, when you displayed polygons as dots, then you
Yeah.
also display several dots. Can you suppress that so you only display 1 dot per feature, in spite of being multi-feature features?
Oh, in this case, like with the labels themselves.
Example given, yes.
Yeah, so that depends. This depends on how your data is structured. Because let's see, we have, yeah, this is the version of the Comuna where
Oh, got it.
it's a single part feature. So we could might be easiest to handle that in data processing, where we could dissolve this layer by the Comuna name, so that
Check.
all the islands that made up a Comuna would be part of a single feature, and then it would just get a single label, and you'd have to choose which one you wanted to label that way.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Any other questions or comments or things that you'd like to see in the last minute or two here? Are you full of? Okay.
Bring it on.
Well, great. So I will send out the assignment, and that assignment is going to have links to YouTube videos also for all of these, and I'll include step-by-step instructions too. So you'll have precise instructions for how to do everything that I've walked you through this morning. And then, of course, I'll also send you a link to the session today so you can rewatch it. So with all of that, you should have all the tools you need to nerd out on some QGIS symbology until the next class. Great. Well, tak for i dag.
You're welcome.
Vi ses.
Tak for det.
Næste uge.
Vi ses.
Hej.
Hej.
Hi.